Hello, and welcome to Learning from Nature, the Biomimicry podcast with me, your host, Lily Ehrman. Today I am joined by Jamie Miller, and in this episode we will explore biomimicry applications in architecture, why biomimicry is crucial for our future on Earth, and how we get there together. Jamie Miller is the Director of Biomimicry at B+H Architects. He is also the president of Biomimicry Frontiers, an award-winning consultancy, and the founder of the Biomimicry Commons, an incubator and education platform that Fast Company named a 2019 world-changing idea. Jamie holds a PhD in engineering, which focused on systems-level biomimicry and urban resilience. He was the director of OCAD University's Biomimicry program and has been a leader in the field since 2004. Jamie continues to work with Indigenous elders and the leaders in the field of biomimicry to deepen his understanding of the principles of biomimicry while focusing on its practical application. His mission is to see 1 billion biomimics shift the system towards greater harmony with the natural world. All right, Jamie, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to get into it and explore how you're applying biomimicry. But I'd first like to just have you introduce yourself with your pronouns, please.
My name is Jamie Miller, and my pronouns are he, him.
Awesome. And Jamie, what are you up to right now? What are your positions, and what would you say your title is in life and in professional career sense?
I mean, in life, I'm a husband and a dad, which is top priority. But professionally, I'm the director of biomimicry at B+H, which is a global design firm based in Canada, but we have offices around the world. I'm also the president of Biomimicry Frontiers, which is a consultancy that has kind of transitioned to be more of an education and incubator platform through the Biomimicry Commons. So that's kind of what I'm up to. There's a few projects on the go there, but all heading in the same direction.
Cool. And viewers might not know this, but I'm actually working with Jamie right now on Biomimicry Frontiers, educational curriculum and outreach, and just in general kind of thinking about the future of what these programs look like. And I'm so excited about where that's headed.
Yeah, it's so good to have you on board.
And I'd like to kind of jump into it with your description of biomimicry.
I mean, I'll say what Janine taught me, who is my original teacher, but biomimicry is innovation that's inspired by nature. But to me, it's fundamentally a lens or a perspective with which we can view the world. And that's the space that I really love to stand in is once you're looking through the world from a biomimetic lens, you don't really necessarily need the methodology or the tools. You actually just tap into this lifelong communication or adventure with nature where it will teach you different things at different times, and you can go to it with this lens to ask it questions. So it's more of a perspective in my mind. Totally.
I love that. And I think it is really important to realize that perspective is at the forefront so much of the time and should be at the forefront, and is such a natural progression when people learn about biomimicry. I mean, that's the case for myself. When I was first hearing about it, you do kind of dive into the methodology and try to figure out, like, what does this look like on a design level or, in the world that I live in? But also, it becomes a really important part of, like, how we view everything.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the fun part for me and why this is a never-ending journey. This is a lifelong journey for me, and I can't really do anything else, is because it is a perspective. And I've worked with Indigenous people here in North America or Turtle Island. And in fact, one who I've become quite close with, when I told her what I did, when I told her about biomimicry, she said to me, well, we've been doing biomimicry for thousands of years. And that's the fun, like the real beauty of this is that it can shift my Eurocentric or Western science approach to life and to look at nature in a new lens and with a new language. And, she told me that she called trees standing people. And now when I chop a tree down, I have a totally different relationship with that tree than if I were, 20 years ago before this journey began. So it's such an amazing kind of shift in a lens. But I think my point here is to also note that it's a shift in my lens, and it's not necessarily a shift in everyone's lens. And some people have biomimicry perspectives already, or what you say, quote unquote, is biomimetic.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's such an important topic too, because I am definitely in that same boat, especially after reading a lot of Robin Wall Kimmerer's books, actually getting the privilege of meeting her and having lunch with her at one point, which was an absolute joy, and hearing her talk about her relationship with the natural world. And it is like, I think I was raised in a way where that wasn't the center,
right.
In the Western colonized areas in school and even at home. But there was this kind of deeper ideology that was almost immediate when I started learning about biomimicry, because it is, you're in relation with the natural world. It's not something that we take from and destroy in the process, but it's in a relationship with us forever and for our generations to come and our grandchildren. And so I think that's, it's not talked about as much, but it's something that I love to bring to the forefront in a lot of these conversations.
I think what you're touching on too, Lily, is what a lot of people gravitate towards when they hear about biomimicry. I think the general population that is into biomimicry, there's like this innate connection, this like old belief that seems to come up that they're so excited by. It's like the ethos of biomimicry is very attractive to them. And I think that's what you're talking about, is it's touching back to these roots that some of our cultures have kind of severed from or been disconnected from, that it's reawakened through this idea of biomimicry.
That we need. That is
totally
good for our soul and our happiness and our passion and how we bring that to our work and our lives and everything. It's so important.
Yeah.
And that's a good bridge to this question I have for you that will kind of guide us through the rest of this conversation as well. Why is practicing biomimicry important in our world today? I think we touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear you explain that a little bit more.
The way I see it is that our thoughts form our environments. So what we think is ultimately what informs what we create. And if we're going to see a paradigm shift, which I think is necessary right now, the wicked problems we're facing are challenging these old mental models that we have. And if we're going to have a paradigm shift, we have to manifest it through our designs, through our architecture, through how we build businesses, how we run communities. And so for me, the manifestation of biomimicry is that part that will drive the paradigm shift. When people can see it, then they can understand it. And when they understand it, they'll start to believe it. And so that's kind of how that's really informed what I do. I've been working in biomimicry for 18 years and I'm driven by this idea of applying it and seeing it applied in the built environments, because that to me too is really where the story is told. Instead of me telling stories, it's like when somebody can see it. In fact, when I finished my PhD, my dad, I've told this story before, but my dad's a very practical man. He grew up on a farm and, this very heady philosophical PhD. And he's like, okay, Jamie, now show me what biomimicry is. And that was kind of the impetus for creating Biomimicry Frontiers. It's like, great, let's figure out how to make this real so that my dad can see it in action.
Yeah, I love that. And that's so important as we kind of bring this movement into a meme, into reality, is showing people how it's done so that they can get excited and create a future where we center these life-centered applications and built environment, and we can live it. It's not just something we can learn and think about, but then make it a reality. And that's a really tricky part of biomimicry. And I've talked about this with some other folks like Tim McGee on the podcast a while ago, who's in this kind of application space and innovation space where scaling and making things, getting them to the next level is often really tricky, especially for a discipline like biomimicry that is very disruptive to our current systems. And so I want to take a step back before we dive deeper into that. And I'd love to have you share a little bit of how you first got interested in biomimicry and really what made you fall in love with the practice and got you to where you are right now.
Growing up, I was really fortunate that my parents took us camping on our vacation. So we'd go to the backcountry a lot in Canada, and we kind of grew up in canoes and on bikes. And so I've always had an affinity for the natural world. I've always enjoyed like whitewater paddling, anything that kind of puts you on the edge, that makes you feel like you're very small and that nature could snap you up whenever it wants. But it was actually in 2004, and I could actually pin it to a specific time. I was in my third year of engineering at Queen's University, And prior to this event, I had been thinking that engineering couldn't be just what I'd been taught. It couldn't be just pipes and buildings and bridges and things like that, that there had to be different ways of doing this, that there had to be more creative solutions to these problems that we were facing and trying to design for. And I took an elective called Math and Poetry, which was an hour and a half of math and an hour and a half of poetry, where we kind of just dissected poems or dissected math theorems. And it was neat because we didn't talk about poems in a mathematical sense or math in a poetic sense. We just halfway through, we just shifted gears and started looking at poems. And there was one math theorem that really set me off, and it was the Fibonacci sequence. And the professors were brilliant at really making us believe we were coming up with these theorems or uncovering these poems ourselves. And in the Fibonacci sequence, he had us look at the sequence of numbers, and then from there start to play with them in geometry and boxes, and we came up with the golden ratio. And I say we came up, it's it already was there, but we just figured out what Fibonacci already figured out. Mm-hmm. And then from the golden ratio, we came up with that spiral, and the professor asked, where have you seen that before? And that's kind of when the whole paradigm shifted for me, or the whole thing clicked, that you see this spiral in pine cones, in sunflower seed packaging, in the vortex in the bathtub when you pull the plug, in waves curling, in the way that the universe is expanding from the Big Bang, in your ear, in your skin. This spiral is everywhere. And it was at that moment that I kind of realized that all this time I'd been trying to use math to engineer our environments, and yet math was in nature and could teach us about our environments and how to do design. And that was really the trigger for me. From there, I became obsessed with this idea that nature could teach us how to design or do design. And I read a book called Cat's Paws and Catapults, which talked about those unanswered questions you have as a 5-year-old, like how does an ant carry so much load, or how does a cat jump so high? And then I found Janine's book, Janine Benyus's book, Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature. And once I had read that, I was like, okay, how do I find this woman? And then eventually I tracked her down, and we connected in Costa Rica on one of their early biomimicry workshops. And it was really from there that I just kind of tried to stick to her hip as much as I could, being taught by her and Dana Baumeister and a couple others in the biomimicry group. And that was it. That was kind of the journey. And I realized that I'm not going to do anything else. This is this is my job from here on.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. It was a matter of just creating my own future from there.
That's amazing. And I want to dive deeper now into how you're applying biomimicry into your career right now, currently. And I say this, and this is a huge question that's a theme in this podcast, because part of this podcast is me wanting to show people how it's done, what it looks like, virtually speaking. And because, in my teaching experience and the workshops I've led and the courses I've created and the people I've talked to who are so excited about it have this initial passion and light bulb moment, right? And then there's kind of this fizzle out of, I don't really know how to apply it, or like how to build it into my life, or what this looks like, or what my future in biomimicry could be. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and maybe apply it in some little areas, or like learn about it more. And I'm hoping that this podcast can be a voice to those people that you can do it. And you are doing it, Jamie. And so I want you to tell us how you're doing it.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, Lily, because we need everyone to be finding out how they can apply it to their life. That's how this system is going to shift. It's not going to shift from the top down, just like nature kind of emerges from bottom up. So, for me, it's really about aligning it with what I believe and what I'm passionate about and what I think my skill sets are. So in doing my PhD, I realized how important intact ecosystems were for mitigating climate change. That if we stopped kind of cutting trees down and cutting forests, that would be doing a much better, like a much higher service for our own species. So the area of interest then was land use planning. How do we, bring biomimicry into land use planning, which would, to me, have the biggest impact on mitigating climate change? And my skill sets really was about storytelling and understanding metaphors from nature and telling them in unique ways. And so to what this means in terms of a timeline is first I did my master's and brought biomimicry into education. But I felt like a lot of people were bringing biomimicry into education. So then I went to work for the government of Canada in the greenhouse gas department, and really kind of was banging my head against the wall there. So I couldn't find how biomimicry could apply there. So did a PhD, which focused on urban resilience. And I used systems level biomimicry, where I learned about something called the adaptive cycle, which teaches us about ecological resilience and really highlights the difference between how our built environments are in relation to the natural environments. So it was there that I kind of built the philosophy and figured out the methodology as well of, okay, how do we bring biomimicry to land use and master planning and urban design? And then I started my company, Biomimicry Frontiers, which again was just about exploring and reiterating kind of designs. I was lucky to get some clients who wanted me to try biomimicry. And so, I was helping design a house in India for several years and worked on some master plans. And so, from there, brought on to B+H to help build their biomimicry practice. So in practical terms, the biggest way that we bring biomimicry into master planning is starting with what we call the living story of place. So we start with understanding what the trajectory of that landscape is. And the idea is we want to work in harmony with nature. We want to not fight nature. So we're looking at it at multiple levels, macro, meso, micro, looking at, change dynamics, like some of the big things that will influence our designs or influence the landscape, and trying to map out how we can fit into that. And this is not as sexy of a biomimicry story as Velcro, where you can just say Velcro copied burrs and you can see that. It's a little bit more systemic, which is a longer story, but nature constantly fits form to function. It finds local available resources and is locally attuned. It creates cooperative relationships. So these bigger principles is what drives our living story. We want buildings to we want to go beyond doing less harm. We want our buildings to be contributions to the place. And in order to do that, you have to know what that place is doing, how your building will influence the dynamics. We talked about building infrastructure in a stepwise function, just like an ecosystem or a forest. It doesn't, all of a sudden a forest doesn't just show up, it grows. And so there's multiple ways we do that. And then the other part about it as well is in all of our designs, in our living story, we're trying to figure out what assets are here that we can learn from. So we'll look at forms and processes in that environment to help shape what we're going to do, because that nature knows how to design in that context. So in India, we looked at elephant skin, for example, as inspiration for passive cooling facades. In a master plan in Alberta, we looked at the wetlands and these ribbon of wetlands to understand how we can deal with our waste management and our water purification technologies. We also learned from the buffalo in this same land use development. This area had traditional buffalo hunts, and we're working with the Métis people, who are an indigenous group. And so we learned from the buffalo and how they kind of re-engineered their environments. They were engineered or ecological engineers and would reshape their environments to produce more grasslands. And so we learned from the buffalo as to how they chomped certain parts of the grasses and how they pushed down certain trees to create more biodiversity, just like a beaver. So there's all these stories that we're picking up from the land and bringing it into this living story methodology in an effort to put buildings in places that help and contribute to the landscape and that create conditions conducive to more life. And then the final thing that we do is to measure whether we're a contribution. We will measure the ecological performance of that site prior to us coming. So how much CO2 it's sequestering and how much stormwater it can retain and how much noise it can reduce or temperature it can reduce. And then we measure the ecological performance of our buildings or our design or site afterwards. And our goal is to be a contribution to sequester more carbon, to retain more water and floodwaters, to reduce or regulate temperature. So that's how we practically apply it in land use and master planning, but we're also exploring architecture and interior design as well. So there's just endless ways to bring this to life. And it's a matter of, like I said, identifying what it is you're passionate about, maybe what skill sets you have, and then reiterating again and again your methodology to figure out how it can be applied.
Right. And that's an important kind of point too, of finding what you're good at, what you love doing, what you can be paid for.
Exactly.
And how you can work in biomimicry to all of that. You mentioned something in that little segment that I want to emphasize and maybe have you explore more, this idea of doing less bad versus
right.
doing good. And I think there's terms, a lot of lingo around this, kind of like sustainability and regenerative. And I think I like the term life-friendly because it goes beyond sustainability and even regenerative a little bit. And you also mentioned that, life creates conditions conducive to life. And so I'd like you to kind of touch on that a little bit more. And maybe within that, give us a few more examples of the work you're doing at B+H and how that can be, like what that looks like in architecture.
Yeah. So in terms of doing less harm, the reason I steer away from that is that it promotes this belief that humans are a problem. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to believe that. I don't believe that. I think we are a natural species. Our breath feeds trees. Our bodies will feed the soil when we die. We are an intricate part of this, or an integral part of this system. And so to concentrate on doing less harm comes from the place that we're a bad species. And Janine said this to me when I first met her, and it's one of the best quotes I've ever held on to. Or I've ever heard. And she said, Jamie, you have to remember that we're not a bad species. We're just a very young one. Mm-hmm. And that is fundamentally what this is all about, is we are just a young species. And I often think of us as a bunch of teenagers that got the keys to the car and we're just doing donuts in the school parking lot. We're a bit like immature. And so we need some elders. We need to wisen up before we crash into that tree. So it's a matter of recognizing that we're an integral part of this ecosystem, and that we need to remember that we are a contribution and that we can be a contribution again.
And something we can easily forget too, because we are a very clever species. We like thinking that we are at the top of the food chain and have all the answers. But we ultimately are so very naive.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And Dana Baumeister, another co-founder of Biomimicry 3.8, she would talk about quieting human cleverness. And I think that's a big part of biomimicry, is just recognizing that we may not be thinking with, maybe most holistically.
Yeah.
And that's maybe perhaps really what I got passionate about in my PhD, was understanding, okay, what made humans so different from the rest of the natural world, and exploring the assumptions that have driven, the dominant designs. And so this isn't to your question, but I do want to touch on it because I think it's important that it's our assumptions that drive our design. And so early on, the dominant culture that was designing cities was holding on to these ideas of Newtonian science, or that we can separate and control nature, or the siloed thinking, or this material paradigm, the belief that unlimited technological and economic growth were the keys to happiness and well-being, or engineering resilience, which is this belief that you can put energy into materials and structures to fight nature. And those are three key paradigms that I studied, and I say all those recognizing that they're not bad. Like I don't make them wrong. They're actually incredible that they've propped us up as a species, a very powerful species. And so the things that we're doing today wouldn't be capable without those assumptions. And I'm grateful for those assumptions.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're incompatible now with our understanding of nature and how big we've become. And so our assumptions have to shift and change. And so what are the new paradigms? What are the new principles that we can adopt today? And that really depends on how we understand nature. And that's the cool thing about biomimicry, is that it's coming at a time, or it's coming of age when we need new models, we need new paradigms, we need new assumptions. And the ones that we're drawing on are not necessarily coming from us, but from our understanding of nature and our interpretation of nature. So to your other question about creating conditions conducive to life, that's the fundamental driver, and the fundamental assumption is what we, in everything that we're doing, is it creating conditions conducive to life? Because if you left life to its own devices, it would create conditions conducive to more life. It naturally self-organizes, and this is just the law of thermodynamics. This is just what it does. It's a dissipative structure that wants to just eat up the sun and turn it into the lowest form of energy as possible. And so as long as there's a sun and conditions for life, life is going to grow.
It's funny when you're podcasting, because I'm just like nodding along to everything you're saying, but you can't see any of that.
Yeah.
But yes, totally. And it really well said too. I think it's an important distinction because, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the interview too, biomimicry is very disruptive. And I think you just touched on a few reasons why that is. Our current systems are not built to support this kind of innovation. And, if you think about like materials manufacturing, industry, transportation, they're all built on these almost kind of post-industrial systems that are destructive inherently. And biomimicry, because it's the opposite, it takes a longer time for innovation to come to life and it's just a longer innovation cycle and a longer kind of getting it to reality cycle. And that those weren't the greatest words to describe that, but I think you know what I mean of like, there's so much disruption that happens when you do biomimicry. Yeah. And I think that can be frustrating. And that's, again, maybe to the second part of that question of like, how can we do it in a way that works in the current systems and disrupts so we can move towards this future that is life-friendly, not only for humans, but for the ecosystems that we live in and the organisms that we share these ecosystems with. And you're doing this in architecture. And I think that's a big literal showcase, visual showcase of what's possible. And there's some really great stuff coming out of B+H, so I'd love to have you explain a little bit more, provide some details of what that looks like, what we can get excited about for the future.
Yeah. Architecture is interesting because it's a new field to me. And so I really have to leverage the genius of the people in my group. And that's why I joined B+H, is to really partner with these smarter people than me that understand architecture. So one project that we just finished up was a very large tower in Vietnam that was a design competition. And I kind of helped push the idea of using nature as an inspiration. And it's in a river delta, and river deltas are very dynamic. And both the soil and the water are very dynamic. And so looking at local species, we looked at a mangrove, which have these really beautiful kind of spider-like root systems that there's all these legs going out into the soil, and that multiple kind of roots, those multiple roots create more stability. It dissipates that energy from the river, from the delta, so it makes it more secure. And so that was an obvious metaphor for this building, just in terms of its form. And so there are multiple, I'm sure your listeners know, but I'll reiterate it. There are levels to biomimicry. You can copy nature's form, you can copy nature's processes, and you can copy nature's systems. And each of them has a different level of depth. So copying form is cool. It could improve efficiency. It could improve stability like it did in this case. But it's not necessarily sustainable because it's not being created like nature, or it's not relating to the system like nature. So we designed this tower that has multiple foundational foundations to help build stability on this little island it's on. We also created a bit of a spiral pattern to leverage the wind energy that would be harnessed by this shape and in this environment. And then also the top had a flower petal kind of design, which was more ornamental, but we did it in a way, copying bromeliads or the way that water can be captured in a building. And so those are very simple additions for how we brought biomimicry into this tower. But then we wanted to explore further, and how could this, be a contribution to its place? So we talked about putting on facades that allowed nature to naturally grow. Could we have, these mesh systems that allow ivy and the nature to grow up? even under the three foundational pillars, what's great about mangroves is that protective area creates a great environment for more biodiversity. So a lot of fish will kind of congregate there. So in these pillars, we were designing. One was a bit of a showcase, but having an aquarium where people can see. It was a very literal metaphor, but having an aquarium in the foundation, like in those three pillars that people can see, and it kind of attracts other people to come up into the building and congregate. And we designed a park system underneath so that people can hang out there. But we also were looking at ways of emulating the ways that the mangrove can also desalinate water and collect its own fresh water.
Oh,
and
cool.
So integrating desalination technologies and different technologies in the building. And again, it's like just thinking about it in multiple ways. And I definitely recognize that a giant tower is maybe, using concrete and glass is not going to be the best, the most sustainable thing, and maybe not something I totally, would do on my own. But in entering architecture and biomimicry, we need some of these stories. I need to start to play with them to figure out how we can go further, because that tower is going to be built and designed regardless of whether I'm there or not. So how can I have my small influence? And to me, it could be a great, a giant billboard for the philosophy, which is truly what I am passionate about, is how do we get more people thinking from a biomimetic lens, and what better way than to have this iconic building that leverages nature's genius and talks about efficiency gains and system gains, because we copied a small metaphor in nature.
And all of these projects, whether they're 100% amazing biomimicry applications or not, right, they're kind of helping us build this pathway of what does this look like and how can we all contribute to a biomimetic future.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the quote that you have, that you say a lot for Biomimicry Frontiers, that we are really emphasizing with Frontiers right now, is that we need 1 billion biomimics.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, how do we get there? No easy task, but
no, I think it's a snowball effect that I truly believe it's going to happen. I see in my lifetime that biomimicry as a term becomes irrelevant because we're all adopting a more nature-based approach. The more people hear about it, every time I talk about biomimicry, I usually get the same reaction, which is, that makes so much sense. And so the more we get people thinking this way, the more they're going to infuse that thinking into their products and designs, the more we're going to see it shift, and then it's kind of a snowball. And the 1 billion comes from research. It's actually, we found new research, so Lily, we have to update. It's 2 billion biomimics.
Oh boy.
Which, hey, it's okay, we'll get there.
We can get there.
But it's this research that shows that when 25% of a population adopts a certain mindset, the whole population shifts. So you just have to get a quarter of the 8 billion people to think this way. And the great thing is we're not doing this alone. It's not just biomimicry. There's the rise of indigenous knowledge, and the importance of indigenous knowledge is becoming more and more prevalent. There are farmers. My grandpa lived on a farm for 100 years, and he thought biomimically. He understood circularity. He understood how to design in place. And so it's not just biomimicry, but if we can get 2 billion people thinking from a nature-based lens and recognizing that nature is the ultimate guide or the ultimate mentor and measure for how to live on this planet, then we'll see the system shift. So that's what we're aiming for.
It's possible.
It's so possible.
And part of that pathway is the offerings that you have at the Biomimicry Commons, which I'd like for you to explain a little bit, because especially because we have a cohort coming up here with enrollment that's open. And so I'd love for you to explain what the Biomimicry Commons is and what course offerings you currently have.
Yeah, the Biomimicry Commons is the fertile ground for you to figure out how to bring biomimicry into your life, or how to adopt that lens. It comes from this desire to want to see other people build their own biomimetic future. I feel so fortunate that this is my job, that I I do what I love and love what I do, and I want to help other people find their own niche and their own pathway. So that's what the Biomimicry Commons is. It's that grounds for you to find your pathway, but also find your community that's also finding their pathway, and helping them and then helping you. And so we do have 3 service offerings now. One is the easiest entry point, which is just a biomimicry guide. It's a PDF textbook that pretty much wraps up my last 18 years of exploring biomimicry into one kind of do-it-yourself interactive workbook. So there's exercises, case studies, philosophy, there's the tools, methods, and really a whole module dedicated to figuring out how to bring biomimicry to your life. So by the end of it, you'll understand the biomimicry mindset, the tools for how to do it, and then also an application or an area of focus that you can bring it to. So that's the easiest entry point, but we also have a do-it-yourself course, so a video course where you can kind of work through exercises with me through this video. Again, it's a self-paced course, so you can do it on your own time, but that kind of you're doing that with other people as well, so there's opportunity for discussion, for questions, feedback, things like that. And then the third and the deepest level in my mind is what we're calling the Biomimicry Mastermind. I don't know if there are other masterminds, or I don't think there is anything called a Biomimicry Mastermind. So this might be the only opportunity where we're bringing 15 people from around the world from diverse backgrounds, and we're going to help you find that application. So whether you're a business leader, or you want to start a new company, or you just want to lead sustainability in your work or in your life, we're going to kind of use this as an incubator and really help you understand how to bring biomimicry to your life in a very practical way. So by the end of it, you have a practical pathway forwards, and you're doing it in this tight-knit community that we've learned from past cohorts, can kind of work together for the rest of your lives. Like, you become a bit of a family because you're all committed to the same thing, which is to see the system shift, and you're all finding your own little niche to do that. And so to me, it's such an important part of this fat path and future, because we're trying to really create these leaders of change, and really support these leaders of change. We're not creating them.
And I want to emphasize too that this kind of the last offering, this cohort-based biomimicry mastermind, is an incredible opportunity. This is the course that is open until October 10th. That week is when we start the courses. And it's really a chance, especially if you already have some knowledge of biomimicry and a project you want to do, you get to work with those other folks who are leaders in their field, and Jamie, and really understand how you can apply biomimicry, what that looks like, and then do it.
Yeah.
Which is the scariest part of biomimicry. And so this course is really for those who are really ready to take that leap.
And it's such a good point, because having done biomimicry, built a business on my own, it is incredibly intimidating. And so having a community have your back, it just gives you that extra confidence. And the other thing to note is when you join the cohort, or when you join the mastermind, you also get the PDF and the do-it-yourself self-paced course. So it's like you can access those materials at any time and really deepen your relationship with biomimicry and nature.
Yeah, I like to say that you get to level up your biomimicry practice, because I feel like for folks who are interested and have that kind of baseline biomimicry knowledge or just excitement or passion, this really gives you the tools to do it, and to do it well, and to carry it with you forever. And so I think it is a really powerful offering, and that will help us get to 2 billion biomimics.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Jamie, my last question for you, and I ask everyone this, and I love all of the variation that I hear and just kind of get to envision what that looks like, is what's your favorite way, and how do you reconnect with nature? I mean, my favorite way is anything that's active. Well, it's anything. Walking slowly with my 2.5-year-old through the forest and seeing the world through his eyes is as exciting to me as mountain biking or paddling whitewater or rock climbing. The reason I love the adventure sports is because my friend says, biomimicry is all about dancing with nature and letting nature lead.
So whether you're backcountry camping in the I love winter camping because it helps me maintain focus. Like if I make a mistake, the stakes are higher. And so I appreciate that about, the adventure sports, is that it puts you on your edge and it makes you so alive and attuned to what's happening in your environment, and you have to dance with the natural world, but recognize that you're not really in control. So it's any interaction with nature, but those two are some of my favorites, seeing it through my kids' eyes and or seeing it through my teary eyes, riding too quickly through the woods.
I'm just getting into mountain biking, and I know that feeling of I am on the edge right now. And that's why I love rock climbing too. It's like you said, there's this almost a meditative state where you realize that it's so much bigger than you, and you are just part of this incredible, vast, beautiful system that is also powerful and terrifying, but there's something to marvel at there.
Totally. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for talking to me today, Jamie. I feel like this is a really exciting conversation, and I'm excited to put it out in the world.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and thanks for doing what you're doing. It's great to see people, take their stance in the biomimicry community and share the stories that need to be shared.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you for listening in today, and I invite you to take the next step in your biomimicry journey. Whether that's diving deeper into the practice with a course, picking up that book you've been meaning to finish, or simply spending an hour intentionally connecting with nature. Here's a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass to Spark Your Soul. Action on behalf of life transforms. Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal. It is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us.